The sound of a gunshot doesn't just split the air. It tears time in half. One moment there was laughter, soft music, and the gentle hum of love. The next, there was silence, shattered by screams. My sister lay bleeding in her wedding dress, and I stood frozen, watching her life slip away. People think weddings are supposed to be about beginnings. But for me, that day was the beginning of an ending I'll never escape. Her name was Maria, my little sister. My responsibility ever since I was 25 years old and our parents were taken from us in a car crash. I had promised our mother on her deathbed that I would protect Maria, raise her, make sure she lived the life she deserved. I thought I had kept that promise. She grew up strong, became a nurse, bought her first home in Willowbrook Gardens, a quiet little neighborhood with white fences and blooming rose gardens. She was only 28 when she met James, a high school teacher with kind eyes and a quiet laugh. He adored her. She adored him, and I adored them both. 3 months before her wedding, Maria was glowing. She came to my apartment one evening with her laptop tucked under her arm, showing me color palettes and sketches for decorations. She was like a little girl again, her brown eyes sparkling as she talked about rose garlands, fairy lights, and the backyard she had spent years tending, finally becoming the stage for her dream day. But even then, something dark was circling us. A shadow wearing the face of a woman named Karen Whitmore. If you've ever lived under an HOA, you know the type. She was the president, 52 years old, with the kind of brittle smile that only appears when she's signing a fine notice or reminding you about Rule 14, Section C, subparagraph A to most people. She was just another busybody with too much time. But to Maria, she became a nightmare. It started small, parking warnings, petty complaints about her roses being too bright for the neighborhood aesthetic. Petty, cruel things. At first, Maria tried to brush it off. But I saw the way her shoulders tensed when she opened her mailbox, expecting another letter. I heard the way her voice shook when she said, "David, I don't know why she hates me so much." I knew why. Karen didn't like seeing a young Latina woman own a home in her precious neighborhood. She didn't like seeing Maria, who had worked night shifts at the hospital for years, scrimped and saved every penny, finally build a life for herself. And most of all, she didn't like seeing joy where she had only bitterness. When Maria sent her request to the HOA for a backyard wedding, complete with parking arrangements, guest lists, cleanup crews, everything by the book, Karen stamped it DENIED. Not once, not twice, but immediately, coldly, without reason. "This neighborhood isn't for parties," she wrote. "Weddings disturb the peace." The peace. Funny thing about that word, Karen had approved 3 other weddings that year, all of them white families. When Maria told me about the rejection, I saw her lips tremble. She tried to smile, said maybe they could find a cheap church. But I knew better. I knew she had dreamed of walking through her roses, of standing beneath the archway she built with her own hands. That's when I stepped in, and for the first time in years I used my title. I am David Martinez, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, a man who has sentenced murderers, dismantled corruption, upheld justice. But on that day, I wasn't a judge. I was just a brother with one mission: protect Maria's happiness. I called Karen. My voice was steady, but inside I burned. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, "this is Judge Martinez. I'm calling regarding my sister's wedding." There was silence, a silence so sharp I could almost hear her swallow. I didn't realize Maria had a brother in the judiciary," she stammered. "She does," I said, "and I've read the bylaws. There is no legitimate reason to deny her request. I trust you'll reconsider." 3 days later, Maria received her approval. A flimsy smiley face note was scribbled at the bottom of the letter, "Congratulations." But I knew better. Karen wasn't congratulating, she was seething. Still, Maria was overjoyed. She hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. "David, it's really happening, thank you." I smiled back, but somewhere deep down I felt it. A tremor. A sense that we had only forced Karen to bury her anger, not erase it. The morning of May 15th dawned golden. Birds in the trees, dew on the grass, the kind of morning that makes you believe in beginnings. Maria was awake at 6, already slipping into her robe, humming songs as she brewed coffee. She hugged me, eyes shining. "David, can you believe it?" I kissed her forehead. You deserve every ounce of joy, little sister." By noon, the house was alive. Neighbors arrived with flowers, friends hung lights, cousins unfolded chairs in the backyard. The Johnsons from across the street brought lemonade, while the Patel family helped string garlands. Even Father Miguel, our childhood priest, walked the yard with a gentle smile, blessing the ground where Maria would say her vows. I noticed Karen's curtains twitching across the street, a shadow watching, a shape moving. I told myself not to ruin the day with suspicion. By 3 o'clock, guests filled the backyard. 80 people, all seated, quiet, respectful. Maria appeared in her grandmother's wedding gown, simple, elegant, a piece of family history reborn. I held her arm as we walked down the aisle, and for a moment everything was perfect. James stood waiting, tears shining in his eyes. The music played softly. Maria's face glowed brighter than the lights strung above. And then I saw her. Karen at her window, staring. Her hand gripped something, though I couldn't see what. My gut twisted. I wanted to step forward to confront her, but the ceremony had already begun. Father Miguel's voice rose over the gathering. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Maria's vows made everyone cry. James' words turned silence into sacred air. It was everything Maria deserved. Until Karen opened her gate. She stormed forward, her voice cutting across the yard like broken glass. "I object." Every head turned, murmurs rippled through the guests. "This wedding is illegal," she shouted. "Noise violations, parking violations, this community will not tolerate this circus." Maria's face fell. James put his arm around her. Father Miguel looked bewildered. I stood up. "Mrs. Whitmore, you approved this wedding. You have no authority to interrupt." Her face turned crimson. "You threatened me. You used your position to force me." The guests shifted uneasily. My hands clenched. Maria whispered, "Karen, please, just for today can we have peace?" "Peace?" But Karen's face twisted into something unrecognizable. "Peace? You people destroyed peace the day you moved here, with your loud music, your gaudy decorations, your kind." The air cracked with her words, racist, ugly, exposed in front of everyone. Gasps echoed through the backyard. And then she pulled it. A gun. Everything slowed. Screams, guests dropping behind chairs, James shielding Maria, my phone slipping from my pocket as I dialed 911. Karen's voice shrieked, "You don't belong here, none of you belong here." Maria, trembling but brave, stepped forward. Her nurse's voice, gentle even in terror, "Karen, you don't have to do this. We can be neighbors, we can find peace." But Karen snarled, "I don't want your peace, I want you gone." And she raised the gun. 10 seconds, that's all it took. 10 seconds that will echo in my nightmares until my last breath. The sound of the shot tore the world apart. Blood bloomed across Maria's white dress. And the day that should have been her beginning became her end. The sound of the gunshot didn't fade. It clung to the air like smoke, curling into every corner of the backyard. For a heartbeat, the world froze, and then it erupted. Screams, chairs toppling, plates shattering on the grass, guests diving to the ground, clutching children, shielding each other. The music, which only seconds before had carried Maria down the aisle, cut off mid-note. I dropped to my knees beside her. Blood soaked through the delicate lace of our grandmother's wedding dress, spreading too fast, too red. My hands pressed against her chest, useless against the tide. "Stay with me, Maria," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Stay with me." Her lips trembled, breath shallow. "David," she coughed, crimson spilling from the corner of her mouth. I love you." I shook my head, refusing to hear it. "Don't you dare say goodbye. You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You're going to walk down that aisle again. You're going to dance. You're going to live." James was beside us, frantic, his hands trembling as he tried to hold her face. "Maria, please, stay with me, please." His sobs turned into a broken wail that pierced deeper than the gunshot itself. Around us, chaos raged. Father Miguel shouted prayers over the crowd. Guests cried, some screaming for help, others frozen in shock. And Karen just stood there, The gun hung in her hand, her face twisted not in triumph but in shock, as if even she couldn't believe what she had done. "I didn't mean," she stammered, her voice hollow. "I just wanted, I didn't mean." The words were nothing, they were ashes. I fumbled for my phone, slick with Maria's blood. My fingers punched 911. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" "My sister's been shot," my voice cracked as I shouted the words. "A gunshot wound to the chest, Willowbrook Gardens, 142 Maple Lane. Send everything, now." The operator's voice stayed calm, professional, but I heard the urgency beneath her tone. "Stay with me, sir. Apply pressure, don't move her. Help is on the way." Apply pressure. I was pressing so hard my hands shook, my knuckles white, but it wasn't enough. Blood seeped through my fingers like water through sand. Time became liquid. 7 minutes felt like 7 hours. I watched the light dim in Maria's eyes, flickering like a candle in the wind. Guests huddled together, whispering prayers, some too afraid to look. And then sirens, faint at first, then louder, a sliver of hope cutting through the horror. Red and blue lights strobed across the yard as the ambulance skidded to a stop. Paramedics stormed in, boots pounding the grass, bags clattering. "Step back," one of them ordered, pulling me aside. My hands clung to Maria, refusing to let go. "Sir, we need space." "She's my sister," I shouted, my voice breaking. "Don't you take her from me." But James pulled me back, tears streaming down his face. "David, let them work, please." The paramedics moved fast, practiced. Gauze, IV lines, oxygen mask. One of them called out vitals, numbers I didn't want to hear. "BP's crashing, pulse weak, we're losing her." Losing her. Those words, they hollowed me out from the inside. They lifted Maria onto the stretcher. The roses she had planted brushed against her gown as they wheeled her toward the ambulance, staining petals with blood. I ran beside them, refusing to be left behind. James stumbled at my side, gripping her hand as if sheer force could anchor her soul to this earth. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the sirens wailed, and the world became a blur of flashing lights and desperate prayers. Inside the ambulance, time was measured in heartbeats. The paramedics barked orders, their hands moving like a desperate orchestra. "Get me another line, push epi, we're in VFib." I sat pressed against the wall, helpless, watching machines beep and flatline, watching strangers fight for the life I couldn't save. James was on the floor, clutching her feet, whispering, "Please, Maria, please, don't leave me. Not today, not like this." But no matter how loud we begged, no matter how much we prayed, the monitor kept screaming back at us. They didn't stop, not for 1 second. They shocked her, pressed down on her chest, tried to coax her back to us. But her face grew paler, her breaths weaker, until finally. The paramedic shook his head, a tiny movement, almost invisible, but I saw it. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no, keep going, don't stop, don't you dare stop." But even as I shouted, I knew. I saw the truth in their eyes. Maria was gone. At 4:23 p.m. in the back of an ambulance, my little sister died in her wedding dress. The silence. That's what I remember most. Not the sirens, not the cries, but the silence that followed when hope died. They let us stay with her just for a moment before they covered her body. James pressed his forehead against hers, his cries guttural, broken, the kind that come from a place beyond words. I held her hand, still warm, still soft, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I failed you." The doors opened. The world outside had changed. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispers buzzing like insects. Police swarmed the yard, yellow tape slicing across the roses. Karen was in handcuffs now, her face pale, her mouth still mumbling, I didn't mean to. But she had. I watched her being led away, and for the first time in my career, as a judge, as a man who believed in justice, I didn't want a trial. I wanted her to feel the pain she had carved into us. James collapsed against me, his body trembling. "She was supposed to be my wife, David," he sobbed. "We were supposed to start our life. Why did this happen? Why?" I had no answer. All I could do was hold him as we both drowned in the same sea of grief. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was empty, but the silence was deafening. I sat in Maria's room, her veil folded neatly on the chair, her shoes by the bed, waiting for feet that would never wear them. I picked up her phone from the dresser. On the lock screen was a picture of her and James, laughing under the rose arch she had built. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts. The fairy lights strung in the trees now tangled with crime scene tape. The aisle where I had walked her down now stained with blood. The chair where Karen had stood, objecting to love itself. I thought I'd known grief. Losing our parents had nearly broken me, but this was worse, because this time it wasn't fate, it wasn't an accident. It was hate. It was a choice. And the woman who made that choice had stolen not just a life, but a future, children Maria would never hold, anniversaries she would never celebrate, laughter that would never echo in the home she had fought so hard to buy. I sat in the dark, listening to the clock tick, and I realized something. This wasn't over. Maria was gone, but justice was still mine to deliver. Grief doesn't follow a clock. It lingers, stretching seconds into hours and hours into days. The morning after Maria's death, the world outside carried on as if nothing had happened. Birds still sang. Cars still passed by. But inside her house, silence sat heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards as I wandered aimlessly from room to room. Her wedding dress lay folded in a sterile hospital bag. Stained, evidence now, not a memory. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Maria had eaten breakfast every morning, and I thought about how fragile joy is, how it can be taken in an instant. But grief wasn't the only thing filling that house. It was something sharper, something that buzzed under my skin and refused to fade. Rage. Police cars lined the street that morning, their engines humming. Detectives knocked on doors, questioning guests, neighbors, anyone who had seen Karen in the days before the wedding. She was already in custody, but they were building a case. A case that, for once, didn't need my gavel. It only needed the truth. Detective Alvarez sat across from me at Maria's dining table, notebook open. His tie was loose, his eyes weary, but his voice was steady. Judge Martinez, we're treating this as first-degree murder. Murder, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. You're certain? He nodded. We have witnesses, dozens. She made racist statements in front of 80 people before pulling the trigger. That alone gives us motive. But we also found something else. He slid a folder across the table. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of documents, complaint letters, photographs, even notes scribbled in Karen's handwriting. She'd been building a case against your sister for months, Alvarez explained. Petty things, grass too long, roses too colorful, car in the driveway, all of it targeted at Maria, none of it at other residents. I turned page after page, my anger rising with every word. She hated her. She obsessed over her, Alvarez corrected. She contacted other neighbors, tried to rally them against Maria, most ignored her, some even defended your sister, but she wouldn't stop. And then, he tapped the last page, a printed flyer from a gun range. She practiced. The Johnsons across the street have security footage of her in her backyard, aiming that gun at a target the week before the wedding. My stomach twisted. This wasn't rage in the moment. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned, calculated, premeditated. And suddenly the image of Karen standing at her window that afternoon came back to me clearer now. She wasn't just watching. She was waiting. That night I walked through the neighborhood, past the taped-off gate where Karen had stormed in, past the roses stained dark in the moonlight, past the houses of neighbors who peeked from their windows, their eyes filled with guilt and sympathy. Some approached me hesitantly. Mr. Johnson, the elderly man from across the street, put a trembling hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, David. If I'd known she was capable of this, his voice cracked. We saw her with that gun. My wife told me to call someone, but I thought it was nothing. It wasn't your fault, I said softly, though my voice wavered. She hid her hatred well enough to fool us all. But in the quiet corners of my mind, I wondered if we all ignored too much. If we all let her petty cruelty slide, thinking it harmless until it became lethal. The days blurred together. Funerals are supposed to bring closure, but Maria's only deepened the wound. The church overflowed with people, nurses she worked with, families she'd cared for, neighbors who had once laughed with her in her garden. James stood like a hollow shell beside her casket, his eyes vacant, his hand clutching hers even after the lid was closed. And me, I stood at the podium trying to summon words, but all I could say was, she deserved better. After the service, the weight of justice returned. Corinne's arraignment was set. The prosecutor, District Attorney Sarah Chin, met with me privately. "David, I know this is personal," she said carefully, "but you need to stay out of the case." I nodded. "I'll recuse myself, but I'll be there every day." She studied me, her voice softening. "We'll need every witness, every detail. This isn't just murder, we're adding hate crime enhancements." She made it clear why she targeted Maria. Hate crime. The words burned, but they were right. Corinne had stood in front of everyone, screaming about "you people." She hadn't hidden her poison. She had spilled it proudly before pulling the trigger. The trial became the only thing keeping me upright. While James sank into grief, barely able to leave his apartment, I threw myself into the pursuit of truth. I read every report. I attended every pre-trial hearing. I listened as neighbors testified about Corinne's harassment, how she fined Maria for things others did freely, how she mocked her accent at HOA meetings, how she sneered whenever she saw her tending the roses. And the more I heard, the clearer it became. Corinne had never wanted Maria in that neighborhood, not because of roses or parking, but because Maria didn't fit Corinne's picture of who belonged. The trial date loomed and the media swarmed. Headlines screamed across the state. HOA president shoots bride at wedding. Some reporters called it a tragedy of petty rules. Others called it a hate crime that revealed the rot in suburban communities. I didn't care about headlines. I cared about Maria. The night before the trial began, I sat alone in her house. The fairy light still hung in the trees, now weathered and dull. The rose arch leaned slightly, petals long since fallen. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine her walking down that aisle again, tried to hear her laugh, tried to pretend the blood had never stained the grass. But when I opened my eyes, all I saw was the empty yard. And I whispered into the silence, "Maria, I will make sure she never hurts anyone again." The next morning, Corinne walked into court in a pressed blazer, her hair neat, her expression almost bored. As if she were the victim. As if this were just another HOA meeting she intended to dominate. But when she saw me in the gallery, her face faltered. For the first time, she realized I wasn't just Maria's brother. I was the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. And though I couldn't preside, I would be watching, every second, every word. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about sending a message that hate, no matter how small it begins, will always answer to the truth. Courtrooms are strange places. They're built on silence, yet every sound feels amplified: the scrape of a chair, the shuffle of papers, the gavel's crack. On the morning of Corinne Whitmore's trial, that silence carried weight. Reporters filled the back rows. Families clutched tissues in their hands. And in the front, James sat hunched, staring at the floor, his grief written in every line of his face. I was in the second row, my hands folded, my heart pounding. For years, I had been the one wearing the robe, commanding the silence, delivering the sentences. But today, I was only a brother, powerless, watching, waiting. Corinne entered through the side door, escorted by deputies. She wore a navy blazer, her hair combed neatly, her face carefully blank. But her eyes darted, restless, as though she couldn't decide whether to look ashamed or defiant. She chose neither. She kept them fixed on the table in front of her, pretending not to see the dozens of people who once called her neighbor. "People of the state versus Corinne Whitmore," the clerk called. And just like that, the trial began. District Attorney Sarah Chin rose first. She was calm, collected, but every word she spoke carried steel. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady, "this case is about more than a gunshot. It's about hate. It's about obsession. It's about a woman who abused her power, her position, and her neighborhood to harass, torment, and ultimately murder Maria Martinez on the happiest day of her life." She let the silence hang, long enough for every juror to look at Corinne. "You will hear testimony from neighbors. You will see the letters, the notes, the footage. You will hear from witnesses who saw her scream racist words before pulling the trigger. This was not an accident. This was premeditated, and we will prove it. The defense rose next. A man named Callahan, slick hair, polished shoes, the kind of lawyer who specialized in spinning webs out of shadows. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this was a tragedy. No one denies that. But my client, Mrs. Whitmore, did not set out to kill anyone. She was a concerned citizen. She believed rules were being broken. She brought a firearm to scare, not to harm. What happened was a panic, a misfire, a moment of chaos, not a crime of hate, not murder." His words slithered across the room, searching for cracks, but I saw the jurors' faces. They weren't buying it, not yet. The first witness called was Father Miguel. He walked to the stand, holding his rosary, his voice calm but heavy. "I was officiating the ceremony," he said softly. "I heard Mrs. Whitmore shouting. I saw her storm into the yard. She was yelling about rules, but her words carried something darker. She said, 'Your kind doesn't belong here.' I've been a priest for 30 years. I know hatred when I hear it." The prosecutor nodded, and what happened next? She pulled out a gun, she aimed it at the bride. Maria stepped forward, she tried to calm her, and then, his voice broke. Then she fired. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Some wiped their eyes. Next came the Johnsons, the elderly couple from across the street. Mr. Johnson's hands trembled as he held the remote for the court's monitor. "This is from our security camera," he explained. The screen flickered to life. Grainy footage showed Karen in her backyard a week before the wedding. She held a gun, aiming at a paper target. Again and again she fired, practicing. "This wasn't a panic," Sarah Chin told the jury. "This was preparation." The defense tried to object, but the judge overruled. The footage stayed burned into everyone's minds. Other neighbors testified too. Mrs. Patel, who had seen Karen sneer at Maria in the garden. A nurse colleague who recalled Maria crying over yet another petty fine. One after another, voices rose, painting the same picture. A woman consumed by bitterness, directing it all at the young Latina nurse who dared to find joy in her presence. Then came James. He walked to the stand slowly, each step heavy, as though his legs barely remembered how to move. His eyes were hollow, his voice quiet. "Tell us what you remember," Sarah Chin asked gently. James swallowed. "I remember Maria smiling at me, her vows, the way she looked at me like I was her whole world. And then I remember Karen shouting. I remember her saying we didn't belong. I remember Maria stepping forward, even with a gun pointed at her, trying to calm her. She always tried to heal, always, even then. And then the shot," his voice cracked. Tears slipped down his face. "I watched the woman I love fall. I held her in my arms as she died. On the day we were supposed to start our life, she lost hers." The jury sat in silence, their faces stricken. The defense didn't cross-examine, they couldn't. Finally, the prosecution called me. I hadn't wanted to testify, not because I lacked words, but because I had too many. But when I swore my oath and sat down, I forced myself to steady my voice. "Mr. Martinez," Sarah began, "can you tell the jury what you witnessed that day?" I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them. "I walked my sister down the aisle. I saw her smile. I saw Karen at her window glaring. I saw her storm in, screaming about rules that weren't broken. I saw her pull out a gun. And I saw my sister try to make peace even then. She told Karen we could be neighbors, that we didn't have to be enemies. She chose compassion, and for that, Karen chose to kill her." I let the words hang. The defense shifted, uncomfortable. Sarah leaned closer. "In your professional opinion as Chief Justice, what do you believe happened here?" I looked at the jury, my voice hard. This wasn't a misfire, this wasn't panic. This was hate, pure and simple, and hate has consequences. Silence filled the courtroom, heavy, unbreakable. The defense tried to paint Karen as a misunderstood woman. They brought in character witnesses, a former board member who called her strict but fair, a neighbor who said she was concerned about property values. But even as they spoke, their voices wavered, their words flimsy against the mountain of evidence. Finally, Karen herself took the stand. Her lawyer guided her carefully, asking soft questions. She wrung her hands, tears sliding down her cheeks. I didn't mean to kill her, she whispered. I just wanted to protect the neighborhood. They were breaking rules. I lost my temper. I panicked. The gun went off. But then Sarah rose. Mrs. Whitmore, she said sharply, do you deny saying the words, your kind doesn't belong here? Corinne hesitated. I don't remember. 80 people do, Sarah cut in. Do you deny practicing with your firearm the week before? I was just learning. And yet you brought it loaded to a wedding. Why? To enforce HOA rules. Corinne's face twisted. Her tears dried into something uglier. They never respected the rules. They thought they were special. She thought because her brother was a judge. Stop, Sarah snapped. Answer the question, why did you bring a gun? Corinne's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence said everything. When Sarah returned to her seat, she looked at the jury and said, this isn't about rules. This is about racism, about hate, about murder. Don't let her hide behind excuses. The trial stretched for days, but the truth had already been laid bare. And as I sat there watching, waiting, I realized something. This wasn't just Maria's trial. It was every family's trial. Every victim who had been told they didn't belong. Every neighbor targeted for being different. Every dream destroyed by hate hiding behind rules. The jury would decide Corinne's fate, but Maria's fate that had already been stolen. The trial had dragged on for nearly 2 weeks, but when it came down to it, only a few moments mattered. The moments where truth either cuts through the lies or gets buried under them. Closing arguments. The jury sat stiff in their chairs, 12 faces carved from stone, their eyes heavy with the weight of what they had seen. Some clutched pens, some folded their arms, but all of them carried the memory of Maria's blood-soaked wedding dress in their minds. Sarah Chin rose first. She adjusted her jacket, took a slow breath, and stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, her voice low, deliberate. You have heard the testimony. You have seen the evidence. You have listened to neighbors, to family, to witnesses who saw the defendant stand in that yard, shout words of hate, and pull the trigger. She let the silence sink in. This was not an accident. This was not a misfire. This was not panic. This was hate. Hate dressed up as rules. Hate hiding behind bylaws. Hate that grew unchecked until it stole a life, until it killed a bride on the day she was supposed to begin her future. Her eyes moved across the jury, catching each one in turn. Maria Martinez was a nurse, a daughter, a sister, a woman who planted roses, who helped her neighbors, who cared for sick children in the hospital. She deserved joy. She deserved love, and instead she was met with bullets. Sarah's voice rose, stronger now. Don't let the defendant hide behind excuses. She practiced with that gun. She carried it loaded into a wedding. She shouted, your kind doesn't belong here, in front of 80 witnesses. And then she fired. That is not an accident. That is intent. That is murder. She paused, looked at the jury with quiet fire. Justice demands one thing, a guilty verdict, for Maria, for her family, for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. When she sat down, the silence in the courtroom felt electric. The defense rose. Callahan straightened his tie, smoothed his papers, and stepped forward with practiced calm. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his tone softer, smoother, no one denies the tragedy of this case. No one denies the heartbreak, but tragedy does not equal murder. Mrs. Whitmore has lived in that neighborhood for decades. She cared about order, about peace, about maintaining the community's standards. She was strict, yes, but not hateful. He held up his hands, almost pleading. She brought a gun because she was scared. She thought the rules were being trampled. She thought she was losing control. Did she make a terrible mistake? Yes. But intent to kill? No. Hate crime? No. This was a woman overwhelmed, panicked, and acting in fear. He turned, pointing toward Corinne. She lowered her head, tears dripping into her hands. Look at her, Callahan urged. Does this look like a killer, or does this look like a woman who lost her way for a moment? Don't punish a mistake with a lifetime. He sat down, his words hanging weakly in the air, like smoke that dissipated before it could sting. The judge gave final instructions, the jury filed out, and the waiting began. If you've never sat in that purgatory, waiting for 12 strangers to decide the weight of your grief, you can't understand how endless it feels. Minutes stretch into hours. Every tick of the clock feels louder, sharper. Every shuffle of feet in the hallway makes your heart lurch. James sat beside me, his hand shaking in mine. His eyes were red, but his gaze never lifted from the floor. "What if," he whispered, his voice raw, "what if they don't see it? What if she walks free?" I squeezed his hand. "They'll see it, James, they have to. The truth is too clear." But inside, doubt gnawed. I had seen juries waver. I had seen justice slip through cracks. 2 hours passed, then 3, then 4. The courtroom emptied and refilled with whispers as people stretched their legs. The air grew heavy, stale. And then the buzzer. The jury had reached a verdict. The clerk's voice cut through the hum. "All rise." My knees felt weak as I stood. James gripped the pew in front of him, as if holding himself upright by sheer force. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. No smiles, no frowns, just solemn duty carved into 12 expressions. The foreperson, a woman in her 40s, stood and handed the folded slip of paper to the bailiff. He passed it to the judge. My heart thundered. The judge unfolded the paper, read silently, then nodded. In the case of the people versus Karen Whitmore, on the charge of first-degree murder. The room held its breath. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The word landed like thunder. Guilty. James collapsed into sobs beside me, clutching his chest as if trying to hold his heart in place. My hands trembled, my breath shuddered, but for the first time since the gunshot, I felt something other than grief. Relief, not joy, never joy, but relief. The judge's voice continued. On the charge of committing a hate crime. The pause stretched like a wire. Guilty. Karen slumped in her chair, her mouth opening in disbelief. For the first time, her mask cracked, and what spilled out wasn't regret. It was rage. She turned toward the gallery, toward me, her eyes burning. "This is your fault," she spat, her voice echoing across the silent room. "You and your sister never belonged here. You ruined everything." The deputies grabbed her, forcing her back into her seat. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Order in the court. But the damage was done. The jury saw it. The spectators heard it. Her final words confirmed everything. The hatred was real. The intent was undeniable. The judge looked at the jury. "Is this your unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson said firmly. And with that, it was over. Karen was remanded into custody immediately. No bail, no release. She would wait in a cell until sentencing. As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, but I ignored them all. James collapsed against me, his body trembling, his voice broken. She didn't get to live, but at least she got justice. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. But inside, I knew justice was never enough. Because no verdict, no sentence, no guilty declaration could bring Maria back. And as I walked out of that courthouse, the sky gray above me, the weight of victory felt hollow. Justice had been served, but love had been buried 6 feet under. Courtrooms feel different on sentencing day. Trials carry noise, witnesses, arguments, objections, papers rustling. But sentencing is quiet. The verdict is already written. The only thing left is the weight of the words that decide how a life will end. That morning, the sky was overcast. Heavy clouds pressed low, as though the heavens themselves wanted to witness what would happen. James and I walked into the courthouse together, our footsteps echoing on the marble floors. He wore a black suit that hung loose on his frame. Grief had carved the weight off him. I carried Maria's rosary in my pocket, clutched so tightly it left marks in my palm. Karen sat at the defense table in her prison jumpsuit. The navy blazer was gone. The mask of composure was gone. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale. But when she glanced toward the gallery, toward me, her eyes still burned with that same bitterness. No shame, no remorse, just the stubborn conviction that she was the victim. The judge, Patricia Williams, took her seat. A woman of firm voice and sharper eyes, she didn't waste words. "Before I impose sentence," she said, I will allow the victim's family to speak. My chest tightened. The courtroom turned toward me. For years I had spoken from the bench, but this was different. This was not a ruling. This was grief with nowhere left to go. I stood, the rosary digging into my palm, and walked slowly to the podium. My legs felt like stone, my throat dry, but when I looked at Karen, I felt fire. "Your Honor," I began, my voice shaking at first. "Karen Whitmore took more than a life. She took my sister's future. She took our family's joy. She took every child Maria dreamed of raising, every Sunday dinner she would have hosted, every laugh she would have shared. She stole it all." My voice steadied. Maria was a nurse. She saved children's lives. She volunteered at clinics. She brought groceries to neighbors. She planted roses in her garden not for herself, but to share beauty with others. And on her wedding day, she tried to share compassion with the woman who hated her most. Even with a gun pointed at her, Maria said we could find peace. She offered love, and Karen responded with violence. The room was silent, save for the sound of James quietly sobbing behind me. I turned, my eyes locking on Karen. "You claimed you were protecting your community, but you destroyed it. You claimed you cared about peace, but you brought terror. You thought your hatred gave you power, but all it gave you was emptiness. You will spend the rest of your life in a cell, and even there you will be trapped with the truth of what you did." I swallowed hard, my voice breaking. "Maria mattered, and though you took her from us, you will not erase her. She lives in every heart she touched, every life she saved, every person who remembers her kindness. You wanted her gone, but she remains, and you will fade." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I ask this court to impose the maximum sentence, not out of vengeance, but out of truth, to send a message that hate has no place in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our nation. To say with one clear voice, Maria's life mattered." I stepped back, my body trembling, the words echoing in my ears. The judge leaned forward, her hands folded. She studied Karen for a long, heavy moment. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice cold and unwavering, "you stood in a garden filled with love, and you chose to bring hate. You turned a day of joy into a day of tragedy. You murdered a young woman not because she broke rules, but because of who she was. That is the very definition of hate. And hate like yours cannot be excused, cannot be explained away. It must be condemned." Her gavel struck once, sharp as a thunderclap. "Life in prison without the possibility of parole." The words settled over the room like a final bell toll. James gripped my arm, his body shaking with sobs. Reporters scribbled notes, their pens scratching like insects. Karen's face twisted, lips trembling, eyes wet. For the first time, I thought I saw fear in her expression, but it was too late. The deputies took her by the arms, cuffed her wrists, and led her away. She struggled once, looking back at me with a sneer. "This isn't justice," she spat. "This is revenge." I didn't answer, because justice, revenge, they're just words. Maria was still gone, and no sentence, no verdict, no prison term would ever change that. When the courtroom emptied, James and I sat in silence. The noise of footsteps faded, the cameras disappeared, and we were left alone on the wooden benches. He leaned his head against my shoulder. "She should be here," he whispered. "We should be on our honeymoon, we should be planning a family. Instead, we're sitting in a courtroom." I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest unbearable. I know. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed by. The sun broke briefly through the clouds. But inside me, everything was different. The sentence had been given, the gavel had fallen, but the emptiness remained. That night, I went back to Maria's house. It was still mine to manage now, her belongings untouched. The rose garden was overgrown, petals scattered across the yard. I sat on the porch, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. And for the first time, I let myself weep, not as a judge, not as a man seeking justice, but as a brother who had lost his sister. In the quiet, I heard her voice, not real, not present, but remembered. Choose love when others choose hate. She had said it in her vows. She had lived it every day, even in her last moments. And as I clutched her rosary, tears soaking the beads, I whispered back, "I'll try, Maria, I'll try." Because that was all I could promise. Grief doesn't leave when the verdict is read. It lingers. It follows you home. It slips into your shoes and your bed and your food. It stains every corner of your life. Weeks after Karen's sentencing, Maria's house still smelled like roses. The petals had dried, the stems gone brittle, but the fragrance clung stubbornly to the air. James couldn't take it anymore. One evening he called me. His voice was low, hollow. "David, I can't stay here. Every room, it's her. Every chair, every corner. It's like she's here, and then I remember she's not. And it's killing me." I closed my eyes. I knew what he meant. I'd felt it too, the way Maria's laughter echoed in silence, the way her presence filled spaces she no longer occupied. "I'll help you," I told him, "whenever you're ready." He was ready sooner than I expected. The house went up for sale within a month. A young black family bought it, a couple with two little girls who ran across the lawn laughing as if it had never been a crime scene. I stood by quietly as they planted new flowers where Maria's roses once grew. I didn't tell them what happened there. I didn't have the heart. James left Willowbrook. He went back to Oregon, back to the town where he grew up, carrying his grief with him like a stone lodged in his chest. We still spoke every Sunday. Sometimes we shared memories. Sometimes we just sat in silence over the phone, two men tethered by the same wound. But the neighborhood couldn't escape what happened. Willowbrook Gardens had built its reputation on order, beauty, peace. Now it was a name on headlines across the nation. HOA President murders bride at wedding. Those words ran on television, in newspapers, across social media. And suddenly, neighbors who had once kept quiet about Karen's pettiness found their voices. Complaints poured out. Residents admitted how she had fined them unfairly, how she'd targeted families who weren't white, how she'd twisted rules to drive people out. Some even confessed they'd been too afraid to stand against her, fearing retaliation. The HOA board tried to contain the fire, but it was too late. Investigators moved in. Civil rights attorneys got involved. The federal government launched a review. And within months, Willowbrook Gardens HOA was dissolved. The irony struck me. Maria had wanted nothing more than peace in that neighborhood. Karen had destroyed it. But in the end, Karen's actions destroyed the HOA instead. Still, none of it brought Maria back. I found myself driving past her old house sometimes, sitting in my car across the street, watching the new family play in the yard. The little girls rode bikes in circles, their laughter ringing out, innocent, unbroken. And for a moment I let myself imagine Maria watching them, smiling, happy that her house was filled with joy again. But then I would see the rose arch in my memory, stained with blood, and I'd have to drive away. 6 months passed. Grief became routine. I woke every morning with the same ache. I went to work but found little meaning in it. My colleagues covered extra cases for me, gave me space to mourn. I appreciated it, but it only made me feel more useless. And then I remembered Maria's words. "You fight hatred with love." She had said it so often it became a mantra, to her patients, to her friends, even to Karen in those last seconds. That's when the idea came, not justice through courts, not punishment through law, but healing through love. I started small, a meeting in my office with a few colleagues, a few neighbors, a few advocates. I told them I wanted to create something in Maria's name, a foundation dedicated to fighting housing discrimination and helping families targeted by hate. We called it the Maria Martinez Foundation for Community Healing. At first, it was just an idea scribbled on paper, but word spread. Families came forward, people who had faced harassment from HOAs, landlords, neighbors. They told stories of intimidation, of rules used as weapons, of communities poisoned by prejudice. And suddenly, Maria's story wasn't just ours. It was part of a larger truth. James surprised me by calling one Sunday and saying, "I want to help." "You've been through enough," I said softly. "I have," he admitted. "But Maria wouldn't want me to hide. She'd want me to keep fighting. If you're building this foundation, let me work with you." And so he became our first outreach coordinator. The man who had lost his bride on their wedding day now spent his days helping other families stand against hate. It didn't erase his pain, but it gave him purpose. We held workshops in community centers, teaching people how to recognize discrimination, how to report harassment, how to stand together when neighbors tried to divide them. We trained mediators to step in before petty disputes escalated into violence. We created safe spaces where people could share their stories without fear. Every event ended the same way, with Maria's name spoken aloud, her legacy carried forward. The first year, we helped 3 families successfully challenge their HOAs for discriminatory fines. We mediated disputes in neighborhoods that were close to boiling over. We provided legal aid for families forced out of housing by hate. Each victory was small, but each one felt like a step forward. Sometimes, late at night, I sat in my office surrounded by photos of Maria, her laughing in the garden, her holding a baby at the hospital, her standing in her nursing scrubs with tired eyes but a proud smile. I talked to her in the quiet. Maria, we're trying, we're planting seeds, we're fighting back but with love, just like you said, I hope you're proud. And in those moments I felt her, not in body, not in voice, but in presence. The grief never went away, but the foundation gave it direction, turned sorrow into action, turned pain into healing. Still, every night when I closed my eyes, the gunshot echoed. Every dream took me back to that day. Sometimes I dreamed I was faster, that I stopped Karen before she pulled the trigger. Sometimes I dreamed Maria said her vows, kissed James, and danced beneath the twinkling lights until the stars came out. And those dreams hurt the most. Because they showed me the life she should have had. But then, in the morning, I would rise, and I would remember that even if she couldn't live it, we could carry it forward. Maria had always believed neighbors could be family, that kindness could heal, that love could win. And so, even in death, she was still teaching us how to live. 6 months, that's how long it's been since the gunshot, since the dress turned red, since my sister's voice fell silent in a backyard filled with roses. Time doesn't heal. That's a lie people tell you to make themselves feel better. Time doesn't close wounds. It just teaches you how to live around them. Every morning I wake and reach for my phone, half expecting a text from Maria. A joke, a photo of her roses, a story about a difficult patient she somehow managed to soothe. And every morning the silence reminds me she's gone. But grief isn't just sadness, it's anger, it's regret. It's the endless loop of what if. What if I'd walked faster? What if I'd confronted Karen at the window? What if I'd thrown myself in front of the bullet? I replay it in my head, over and over, and every time I'm faster, every time I save her. Every time she smiles at James, says I do, and begins the life she deserved. But then I wake, and the reality comes rushing back. Karen is in prison, life without parole. But that doesn't feel like victory, because victory would be Maria alive. Victory would be children laughing in her yard, Sunday dinners in her kitchen, laughter spilling through her windows. Instead, the victory we got is hollow, justice without joy. And yet, even in this emptiness, Maria's light hasn't gone out. The foundation grows. Each week, more families reach out. Families harassed by HOAs for the color of their paint, the flags on their porches, the languages they speak. Families who thought they were alone until they heard Maria's story and realized they were. James leads outreach with quiet strength. He visits homes, sits at kitchen tables, listens to stories of pain and fear. He doesn't talk much about his own loss, but I see it in his eyes, the empathy carved by grief. He and we carry Maria together now. At our last event, a young woman came up to me. She was shaking, clutching her toddler's hand. "Judge Martinez," she whispered, "I just want to say thank you. My HOA tried to force us out because of who we are. Your foundation helped us fight back. We won, we stayed because of your sister." I smiled, but my throat tightened. I wanted to say because of Maria, but I couldn't speak. The words stuck. So I just nodded, tears burning my eyes, and thought, Maria, even in death, you're still healing people. Sometimes I visit the cemetery. I bring fresh roses, lay them on the stone. I sit in the grass and talk as if she were still there beside me. "Maria," I whisper, "we're trying, we're fighting. We're choosing love when others choose hate, just like you wanted. But it's hard. Some days it's so hard." The wind rustles through the trees. A bird calls, and in the quiet I almost hear her laughter. Not the loud laugh she shared with friends, not the quiet chuckle she gave when she was tired after a long shift, But the laugh she saved for me, her brother, the one that said I'm okay, I'm still here. I hold on to that sound, because in truth that's all I have left. I keep her wedding dress cleaned and preserved in my closet. Some nights I take it out, run my hand across the fabric. It's not just cloth, it's memory. It's the weight of what was stolen, but also the proof of what once was. The caterers never got paid. I asked them to donate the food to a shelter. The flowers went to evidence. The lights tangled with police tape, but the love remains. It's in James, in me, in every life she touched. And so I write to her, words she will never read, but words I need to speak. Maria, 6 months have passed, but I still reach for my phone to call you. I still wait for you to walk through my door with stories, with laughter, with light. I still wake in the night expecting to hear your voice. The world is colder without you, darker, but I hear your echo in the foundation we built. I see your face in every family we help. I feel your hand in every act of kindness that grows from your name. I was angry, Maria, angry at Karen, angry at the system, angry at God, angry at myself. But your voice echoes in me. Choose love when others choose hate. That's what you said. That's how you lived. Even in your last breath, you offered compassion to the woman who killed you. That's who you were. I'm trying, Maria, trying to honor you, trying to keep your light alive. And I promise I will keep fighting. Every case I hear, every ruling I give, I will ask myself, what would Maria want? How can I bring more justice, more healing, more love into this world? Because that's your legacy, not the way you died, but the way you lived. Until we meet again, little sister, save a dance for me in heaven. All my love. David. I fold the letter, tuck it into the pocket of my suit, and carry it with me to court. Because every case now feels like Maria's case. Every victim is my sister. Every act of hate is a bullet I refuse to let fly again. Karen thought she had the power to destroy a life, a family, a dream, but she was wrong, because love is stronger than hate. Hope is more powerful than fear, and Maria's light, my sister's light, shines on. It shines in every rose planted, in every laugh shared, in every act of kindness done in her name. The wedding ended in tragedy, but the love story continues. Not the story of Maria and James alone, but the story of every life her memory touches. And that story will never end. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.